Students of class 8, welcome once again to this English class. In our previous class, we had begun the story, The Face on the Wall, and we saw that we saw how the made up story progresses with the discovery of a face on a wall by the little man, and after that how he uh, decides to go in search of a real man whose face resembles with the face on this wall. Now you look at the second paragraph at page 2, and the first sentence you see it was narrated by the author E.V. Lucas. Children, you keep one thing in mind, that this short story contains another story also. So there are two narrators. One is the author Lucas himself, and the other narrator is the little man who narrates the made up story. So at some places you will find some narrations narrated by the author. So here also we see a sentence in this paragraph which was said by the author. Now what he says here, that he says he passed his hand over his brow as if he was very tired. Now here Lucas tells about the little man that after narrating his story about the occurrence which he was talking of, and after narrating to his listeners, he gives a pause to his narration, and he passes his hand over his brow to pretend before his listeners that he became very much tired in narrating the occurrences which he experienced. He does so to tell the listeners that he actually became very much tired in narrating the real incidences. So and after a short time of pause, he then continues his narration. Again he says, I at last saw him. He says that he finally saw the real man for whom he was searching since long time. He further says he was in a taxi, and that means the real man. He was in a taxi driving east along Piccadilly. I then saw an empty one. Empty one means another taxi, empty taxi he saw that was coming in that direction, and he instructed the taxi driver follow that taxi. I said and leaped in. He entered very fast. Swiftly he entered into that taxi and instructed the taxi driver to follow the taxi, and accordingly the taxi driver managed to keep his taxi in sight, and it took us to Charing Cross. The little man says that the taxi driver managed to keep his taxi in sight, and that took them to Charing Cross. Charing Cross is a place. It is a busy central railway junction in London city. So they reached there, and the little man says, I rushed onto the platform and found my man with two ladies and a little girl. They were going to France. So all of them got down at the on the platform, and uh, they they got down at the railway station, and they went to the platform, and uh, then he says that I hastily purchased a ticket to Folkestone, uh, hoping that I should catch him on the boat before it sailed. But at Folkestone, he got on the ship before me and disappeared into a large private cabin. Evidently, he was a rich man. Children of Folkestone is a port town on the English Channel, in the near the London city. In his narration, the little man says that uh, they reached the railway station, and he purchased a ticket to Folkestone. Uh, uh, Folkestone is a port town on the English Channel, uh, near London. So then he followed the real man who was going towards the ship, who was boarding the ship. So after he boarded the ship, he disappeared suddenly into a large private cabin. That means he disappeared means he entered. He entered inside the private cabin. Uh, this shows he from this little man, uh, uh, he became convinced that this man, the real man, must be a rich man. He was a rich man, because only rich man they reserve the private cabin on the ship. Uh, the little man again says that again I was defeated, but I was determined to go with him. I had only just enough for a single fare to Boulogne, but nothing could stop me now. Now the little man says that again I was defeated, but I was determined to go with him. I had only just enough for a single fare to Boulogne, but nothing could stop me now. I took up my position opposite his cabin door and waited. After half an hour, the door opened and he came out. My heart beat fast. There was no mistaking the face. Every line was the same. He looked at me and moved towards the way to the upper deck. It was now or never, I felt. So the little man, when he found the rich man to be inside the private cabin, he decided to wait before in front of the cabin door until the rich man comes out. The little man felt that he was defeated in his search for the his effort in talking to the rich man because he wanted to talk to this rich man, but he could not. He failed in his attempt. Then he determines to go with him. He decided to go with him, and he had one difficulty that uh, he had not enough money, sufficient money to purchase to afford for the fare or the ship fare or railway or train fare. So um, with despite this difficulty, he maintains his patience in waiting for the rich man at the cabin door, and after half an hour time, the cabin door opened and the rich man came out. When he saw the rich man, the little man's heart started beating very fast, out of nervousness, you can say. And he saw that he looked at the rich man's face, and he became very much surprised on seeing his face, and he says that there was no mistaking the face. The face was looking exactly like the face he saw on the wall. Every line of the face was the same. So, in surprise, he could not um, succeeded. He could not succeed in talking to the rich man. He forgot to talk to him in this situation. While he was looking at the rich man's face, the rich man moved from the place. He moved towards the way to the upper deck of the ship, and so the little man could not talk to him. But uh, he now thinks that if I will not talk today, then I cannot talk in future. I can never talk to him in future. So he decides that he will muster courage. He will gather the courage to talk to him, and accordingly he did so. In a stammering voice, the little man asks the rich man, "Excuse me, but do you mind giving me your card? I have a very important reason in asking it." The little man gathers courage in himself, and he dared to ask the rich man for a card, for a visiting card, and the rich man also gives him his visiting card to this little man. Now, when the little man asked him for a visiting card, the rich man thought that he seemed to be greatly surprised, as indeed well he might, but he granted my request. Slowly he took out his case. Here, case means the visiting card box, a small box of a visiting card size, in which the visiting cards are kept. So he is talking about that case, that that the rich man took out his case and handed him his card and hurried on. It was clear that he thought me mad. The little man he feels that the rich man must have thought him to be a mad fellow, because why a stranger asks him for a visiting card. Now, holding the card tight in my hand, I hurried to a lonely corner of the ship and read it. My eyes grew dim, my head reeled, for on it were the words Mr. Ormond Wall, with an address at Pittsburgh, USA. I remember no more until I found myself in a hospital at Boulogne. Only a month ago did I return. Now, children, you mark one important thing uh, here, that the little man labored hard like a detective. Children, in the beginning of the story, I told you that there are some elements of story which the author have used very meticulously to bring out those story elements through the characters and through the events and the incidents. So we see the element of detective uh, in this little man, in his efforts like a detective. He also followed the rich man, and finally he succeeds in meeting him, talking him, and asking for a card. After this, he like a detective, uh, uh, he makes several enquiries about this rich man. So he goes to different places, and he writes to the American editors and other people whom he knows in London, and he enquires from them about this rich man, this Mr. Ormond Wall. And you see, after he received the card, the visiting card from the rich man, the little man reads out the visiting card on which it was written the Mr. Ormond Wall with an address Pittsburgh, USA. This name, Ormond Wall, when he sees this name on the visiting card, the little man becomes astonished, very much astonished, so much so that he faints, and later he was found in a hospital at Boulogne, and after a month long of hospitalization, he returns back to his house, his home. This is very much surprising that we see the element of suspense. We see how the little man becomes surprised, and he also becomes um, senseless. Now, the author Lucas says that after narrating about his senseless incident, and after describing this much about the occurrence, the little man becomes silent. He was silent. We looked at him and at one another and waited. These two lines are said by the author E.V. Lucas. As I said you before also that at some places we will find the narrations of E.V. Lucas because he is also narrating the story and also about the incidents in relation to the little man and also uh, in relation to the author himself and also in relation to the other strangers who were present at Dabney's house. And you remember that this main story takes place at one place only, that is at Dabney's house. So no more places are to be found in this main story. Lucas further narrates that he started once again after a moment or so. I went back to Great Ormond Street and set to work to find out all I could about this American. I wrote to Pittsburgh, I wrote to American editors, I made friends with Americans in London, but all that I could find out was that he was a millionaire with English parents who had resided in London. But where? To that question I received no answer. Children, you see, like a detective, this little man uh, makes enquiries, several enquiries when he reaches to his home to the Great Ormond Street. He again resumes his work on the rich on the real man, on the rich man whose face resembles with the face on the wall. So he makes several enquiries. He wrote to American editors and he talked to some American friends who are residing in London, but he could not get the answer that where this millionaire or the rich man lives or resides. This remained a suspense till now. Again, the little man says that, and so the time went on until yesterday morning. I had gone to bed more than usually, tired, and slept till late. When I woke, I looked at once at the wall on which the face is to be seen. I rubbed my eyes and sprang up. It was only faintly visible. Last night it had been clear as ever. Almost I could hear it speak, and now it was a ghost of itself. Very surprisingly, the little man finds that the face which he saw a month back, that was now faintly visible. It became like a ghost of itself. Again, the little man narrates, I got up confused and sad and went out. The early editions of the papers were already out. I saw the headline, American Millionaire's Motor Accident. You all must have seen it. I bought it and read. Mr. Ormond Wall, the Pittsburgh millionaire and party, motoring in Italy, were hit by a wagon and the car overturned. Mr. Wall's condition was critical. I went back to my room and sat on the bed looking with unseeing eyes at the face on the wall. And even I Even as I looked, suddenly it completely disappeared. Later, I found that Mr. Wall died of his injuries at what I take it to be that very moment. Again, he was silent. Now, the little man narrates further, and he tells about a shocking accident that took place with the rich American. Uh, he got the news of this accident on his newspaper, on the newspaper, and after some time the little man sees that the face which was faintly visible now disappeared completely. Again, this made him very much surprised. He became shocked. He got frightened. And later, what happens that he again gets the news that Mr. Wall, Ormond Wall, died of his injuries. Now, children, you see the coincidence that the death of the millionaire in the road accident and the disappearance of the face from the wall. Both these incidents are related to somewhat to some extent, and this is nothing but a supernatural incident. Now you see how diligently the little man succeeds in narrating a made up story uh, which is not actually a true one, and he narrates the incidents and about the occurrences in such a way that his listeners still believes him to be they believe him that he is actually narrating the real incidents. Now, after telling that along with the death of Mr. Wall, the face on the wall completely disappears, and after saying this, he remains silent for some time. Now, the author E.V. Lucas, he says that most remarkable, we say it, most extraordinary, and so forth, and we meant it too. E.V. Lucas says that whatever things the little man narrated were all very remarkable and very extraordinary, and they believed that these things what the little man described are true. Again, the stranger said, "Yes, there are three extraordinary, three most remarkable things about my story. One is that it should be possible for a patch on the wall of a house in London not only to form the features of a gentleman in America, but also to have a close association with his life. Science will not be able to explain that yet. Another one is that the gentleman's name should bear any relation to the spot on which should bear any relation to the spot on which his features were being so curiously reproduced by some unknown agency. Is it not so?" We agreed with him. Soon the narrator of the amazing experience rose up and said good night. Just as he was at the door, one of the company asked him what he considered the third most exciting thing in connection with his deeply interesting story. "You said three things, you know," said he. "Oh, the third thing," he said, as he opened the door I was forgetting that. The third extraordinary thing about the story is that I made it up about half an hour ago. Good night again. Now, children, you see here while concluding his story, the little man uh, gives uh, some information about his made up story. He talks about three extraordinary things which are remarkable things about his story. He says that the first extraordinary thing that it should be possible for a patch on the wall of his house in London to form the features of a gentleman in America. And this supernatural incident has no answer, has no explanation, which science will not be able to explain that yet. And another extraordinary thing about his story is that the gentleman's name should bear any relation to the spot on which his features were being so curiously reproduced. When the listeners uh, heard this information about his story, the two extraordinary things about his story, they got convinced. They became convinced with the little man's information. But they again asked him about the third extraordinary thing, and when they asked him, the little man humorously reveals that whatever the third extraordinary thing about the story is that it was a made up story which was made up half an hour ago. So when he reveals this fact about his story, everyone becomes surprised. An atmosphere of humor prevails over there. So, children, this is all about this humorous story, The Face on the Wall. I hope you must have enjoyed this story. There are some exercise works of this chapter. You will be given some answers of these exercise questions in written form in the next week, and another new lesson will be started. So all of you take care of your health. See you. Goodbye.